Oh, you caught me red-handed. I have a confession to make. Even though I'm a pastor, I have my palm read. Sorry. As you probably noticed, I didn't ask for Q&A for Monday, and the reason is well, I've been a little short-handed, and but hopefully I'm catching up soon. So high nine, and hopefully I'll catch up with that pretty quickly. So we won't have Q&A this Monday, but next Monday we will. And and so but I just have a question. Those of you with telekinesis, raise my hand. I've been in quarantine too long. So anyway, enough. Oh, hey, wait. I've got the question. I've got the answer to the Buddhist question. Um, that's the sound of one hand clapping. So we need to lift this quarantine. Okay. Well, we're going to be doing our twisted devotion today. The twisted devotion is going to involve this. Hopefully, you can see this well. If I was to ask you, what would you call a shape that when you placed it in this hole right here, that it would touch all four sides simultaneously? You'd probably say a square or maybe a rectangle. It might be slightly rectangular, I can't tell. And if you did, you were correct. And what would you call a shape that if you were to place it inside this hole, that it would touch all three sides simultaneously? Triangle. And if you were to place it within this hole, that it was to touch all of this surface simultaneously, we would call that a circle. Now, what if I was to ask you, what would you call a shape that when you placed it in this hole, it touched all four sides, but then when you placed the same shape in this hole, it touched all three sides, and then when you placed it in this hole, it touched all of these sides simultaneously? What would you call that shape? And when I've asked this to groups before, they'll say stuff like water or clay. And I'm like, no, not a material, not something that can morph and into these holes. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about a shape that is just as rigid as this right here. What would you call that shape? At which point you usually get it like a smart aleck that says, a trisquircle or something. And I'm like, okay, all right, but can you picture that shape in your mind? At which point most people say they can't, because it just seems impossible that you would have a shape that could touch all four of these and all three of this and all of this all at the same time. That's just a rigid shape. But the truth is it does exist. It's called the wedge of Wallace. You see, when the wedge of Wallace is placed into this hole, it touches the circle all simultaneously. When placed in here, it touches the triangle, and then when placed in here, it touches as a square. It's called the wedge of Wallace. And of course, the reason that it works is because we've added another dimension, haven't we? We've added a third dimension. And usually when somebody gets stuck on this problem, it's because they're thinking two-dimensionally, because we're just viewing this with our eyes, and so we immediately assume we're talking about a two-dimensional situation. We've locked our thinking, if you will, by limiting the dimensions that we're thinking in. And a lot of times, this is where we run into problems when we're reading in the scriptures, because we view God as if he was limited the way we are limited. For instance, like on the Trinity, we can't think of the idea of being three in one at the same time because it seems impossible for us to be able to do that. In other words, we limit God and we make him mortal. And I don't know about you, but I don't want a God who's mortal. I don't mind having a man, or a woman for that matter, for my president or my dentist or my accountant, but I do not want a mere mortal to be my God. And the Bible does not teach a mortal God. It teaches a God who transcends our limitations. For you recall, God says, for my thoughts are not your thoughts, nor are my ways your ways. For just as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. And Jesus expounded a little bit upon this. He was having a bit of a debate with a rich young ruler, and the young ruler wanted to know what he was lacking. And when Jesus finally said, "It's you love your money too much. You need to give it up," the ruler left. He left without that. He couldn't do that. And at which point Jesus commented, how difficult it is for a rich man to enter into the kingdom of heaven. It would be much easier for a camel, a big, humongous camel, to enter in through the eye of a needle. And the disciples responded, well, then who can go to the kingdom of heaven? Who's going to be able to go to heaven then? And Jesus says, well, with man this is impossible, but with God all things are possible. And so I'm going to encourage you, as you're in the scriptures, when you run into an apparent logical wall, someplace where you feel like, well, and how could God do this, or why didn't God do that, or step back a couple steps and think if maybe you are placing limitations upon God that don't exist, that you're having a difficulty in comprehending God. Well, let me get back to that word in a minute. You're having a difficulty understanding God because he extends beyond what you are. In fact, the word I used accidentally was comprehend. We can't comprehend God. To comprehend means to be able to wrap around, to comprehend. Our limited, finite brains cannot comprehend the infinite. But that's not to say that we cannot apprehend, that we cannot touch God and understand him. So I just want to encourage you this week in your quiet times, continue to press in. And that is the Twisted Devotion. And we'll see you soon.